Good afternoon, everyone. I think that my topic is going to fit in pretty nicely after Mel and Tanya because it's very much along the same lines. I did study the niche export opportunities for Australian vegetable growers, thinking about how to increase the size of the vegetable pie. Firstly, I'd like to thank my sponsor, Horticulture Innovation Australia. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to do this if it wasn't for our sponsors, and Nuffield Australia for putting together such an amazing project. 2 years ago, I thought to myself, the next person who says that Nuffield is going to change my life is going to cop a throttling, and here I am 2 years later saying Nuffield has absolutely changed my life. So, a little bit about our farming business. We're on a mixed farming operation on 280 acres in Gippsland in Victoria, and me and my dad farm together, growing brassica crops and potato crops for the Australian fresh market. My Nuffield journey took me around to 16 countries and around the world with this amazing group of people who challenged me, not just from a professional capacity, but definitely in a personal manner as well. So why did I study what I studied? We constantly get told in the vegetable industry that we have a domestic oversupply and we're always worried about farm gate prices. How do we increase those prices on our farms in Australia? We've been spending R&D money on productivity for years now. Vegetable Levy collects about $14 million per annum, and on the last 5 years, about $7 million of these dollars have been spent on looking at how to access these export markets. The problem is we were spending too much money on productivity gains, and every time we would gain more and more productivity, we were bringing our own prices down because Australian vegetables are very much domestically focused. We're going to all these grower symposiums and export symposiums and trade missions and reverse trade missions, and we're being told that there's hundreds of millions of people in Asia, a growing middle class, and that export opportunities are abundant. And I wondered if that was quite the case. And I thought, where are these markets and what exactly do they want and how do we access them? And do we have the capacity to deliver? And I use this picture here of the camel train. This was used in ABC Rural, not that we should be saying too much about them, they're just around the corner, but they use this picture to say that this is why we were having such success in getting our products into the Middle East. And I wondered whether or not that is, if that's how everybody feels about it here in Australia, that there's this food security issue, when it wasn't quite what I thought that I had found out on my travels. This is just a very simple graph. The red line there is fruit exports, the yellow line or the orange line is nuts, and the green line is fresh vegetables. Given that fresh vegetables is the biggest horticultural industry in Australia, we're not having a lot of success here getting our stuff into global markets. And I thought about why, and potentially it's because fruit and nuts are seen as luxury products where people are willing to spend their money, whereas vegetables is just more what kind of goes on the side of your plate next to your meat. And a lot of the markets that I visited are actually pretty secure in supplying their own vegetables. So what were the products and the supply trends that I noticed? And I will declare straight away that given the fact that we're quite high cost producers, I was looking at the top end of the market. The Australian vegetables were consistently more expensive than the other vegetables that I was looking at in regards to our global competitors. So value adding and convenience is an absolute must. Customers are looking at smaller portion sizes, they need packaging, they want ready to cook, and they want fresh cuts. This corn here that you can see in the third picture across is capitalising on that smaller portion size. And that packaging takes that corn from having a shelf life of about 1 week to having a shelf life in excess of about 2 months. So you can see how they're not only adding value for the customer, but they're also adding value on farm. Branding and provenance was also something that was really key. We've got the carrotinis over there, so snacking is becoming, you have to make it a little bit sexy, you have to make it more interesting. Country of origin labelling, this is something that we've been debating about in this country for the last couple of years, and it was really interesting to me that throughout Asia and the Middle East, country of origin labelling is absolutely a given, there's no question about it. Everybody knows where their food comes from, and they have brands associated in their minds with where those countries are. These strawberries here are in Japan. Interestingly, we have about one variety of strawberry that we could probably recognise in Australia. Here in Japan, they had 10 varieties of strawberries, and each customer knew the flavour profile of which prefecture those strawberries would come from, and they would choose based on which they would prefer. Something that here we've got 2 major retailers and the number of varieties that we have of things has really started to reduce. We focus more on productivity and making sure that we've got a lot of yield in our paddocks and not thinking so much about offering customers a lot more options. Specialty products is also trending and very important for us to be capitalising on. These strawberries here, again in Japan, were worth the equivalent of about 70 Australian dollars for that tiny little box of strawberries, and that absolutely blew my mind. This watermelon radish here was something that I saw in the Bronx market in New York City, where they would pay any amount of dollars to get these specialty type of products, purple kohlrabi, Dutch carrots, and it wouldn't matter where they were getting them from because they knew that they had the market there to support it and they could charge any price for it. Retail concepts are also changing. Again, thinking about the fact that we have those two major supermarkets here in Australia, it probably does take a little bit of the innovation out of it. They don't have to do quite as much in order to gain that market share. That selfie of me there, the Nuffield experience gets you pretty good at the selfie. I'm standing in front of an aquarium in the Germano Mall. Customers are looking for an experience. They're not just looking for their products. This man here in the first picture was growing melons in Indonesia. He was the only protected cropping melon grower in Indonesia, and the products that he put out are basically the highest price point in the market. I asked him what he did when he had excess supply, because during the summer season he has more melons. When he has more melons, he starts competing with his own product. And I asked him whether or not he needed to drop the price, and he said he would never do that because it reduced the value of his brand in people's minds. So what he did was he just sent promotion in store, just giving people a little taste of his melon was ensured that he was able to move the excess supply that he had. And moving and looking at the food service and retail that is available now in the world, we don't just buy our bananas. In Asia, you can walk up and you can choose to buy your bananas, or you can buy a banana smoothie. You can buy a pineapple, or you can buy a cup of freshly cut pineapple. And it's fresh cut, it's not treated with anything. Customers are feeling safe about the fact that there's no chemical on their product. I met with importers and wholesalers, and they really, I think that maybe in Australia, again, I say that we're very domestically focused and perhaps we overestimate the power of our brand, because I'm talking with those importers and wholesalers, they were saying that we have a real issue in Australia with supply consistency, that as soon as the domestic prices raise here in Australia, all of a sudden they can't get Australian product. We need to be thinking about having longevity of supply and consistency of supply. And even though they might want 10 cauliflower containers per week, they can't deal with them all at once. In Indonesia, they were moving their stuff around in 2-ton trucks. So you can imagine how effective that is and the challenges that it creates with cold chain and distribution and those type of things. I also had a little look at what was happening in global production. So we were thinking before about the camel train over the desert. This is potatoes in Saudi Arabia under centre pivot. Not only are they able to grow their own potatoes, they're also putting them on the global market. So even though we've got this question of 2050 and 9 billion people and how are we going to feed them all, at the moment we're not exporting our products. We're saying that we've got a domestic oversupply, and all these countries who are focused on food security and self-sufficiency are really focusing on their foreign investment into other nations, and their government subsidies are supporting their idea of food security and innovation and technology. So this here, the second photo that you can see, is in Qatar, and they've got growing flowers in the desert. It's basically the Qatari government's way of saying, we've got food security covered. Not only do we not need to grow vegetables in the desert or fruit in the desert, we can grow flowers because we've got our food security sorted. So we have to be quite realistic about that. Third photo along is the Mitsubishi plant in Japan, where they're growing vegetables indoors. And this last photo here fascinated me. This was an aerial view out the plane window in South Korea, thinking that again that this was an option for Australian vegetables, and surely they've got all these people and they don't have so much arable land, and yet every last bit of land in between the city and where the airport was covered in protected cropping. And not only were they growing their own food, again they often flood the Australian domestic market and lower our prices as well. Globally, everybody's really concerned with productivity gains, utilising their waste. This coconut grower has also, in India, has also decided that he would start growing nutmeg. Usually it's only the nutmeg seed that's used. He's now using the fruit to add more value. He's candying it, he's also juicing, and the hair on the outside of the coconut he's also using to make rope. So we really have to be thinking in Australia is how do we utilise our waste? and how do we get more from less. Cooperation is also key. All around the globe, people are cooperating a lot better than what we do here in Australia, I would have to say. The Kumar, the third photo there on the top, instead of buying one piece of equipment per farm, they buy one piece of equipment per 20 farms, and they share the cost of that. They work together. It helps them with their labour costs, it helps them with their capital costs, it helps them with their reinvestment costs. Then you've got geographical indicators where lots of small producers will come together to create something like Roquefort cheese or champagne. That's just key that you have to be cooperating to get these type of products to create value. I also visited a number of trade shows while I was away. This is the different stands, so you've got different brands. You've got Pink Lady in the top corner, you've got Zespri down the bottom, and you can see how they create a real brand feeling. But that didn't just extend to individual brands, it also extended to countries. So you can see Ecuador, everybody from Ecuador was together. It didn't matter what the commodity was, what the product was. They were all together in this really Ecuadorian feeling place. And I particularly like this bottom one in the left-hand corner. This was in the Italian stand, and this probably maybe appealed to me because I could relate to it. But it's just grapes, but you just get the feeling, the Italian vibe of hospitality and voluptuousness and generosity, and that brand is carried through. Sadly, the Australian stand was a little lacklustre, and everyone who was producing different commodities, you had citrus in one corner, you had veggies in another corner, you had state governments there. There was absolutely no cohesive brand and no cooperation whatsoever. So my recommendations. First thing is that we have to stop thinking domestically. We have to start thinking globally. Farmers need to start going on holidays, growers need to start going on holidays and having a look at what the market wants and where they're positioned in the ability to give them the products that they want. So you're not going to find the answer in your paddock. You're probably going to find your answer by visiting another grower, meeting with your customers, meeting with industry and meeting with government. Relationships are absolutely vital. And it's so important for us to think about how do we foster a culture of absolute cooperation. We need to create export strategies on a government level, at an industry body level, and in individual business levels. We need to think long-term goals instead of just the immediate, if I have to sell this for less than I'm selling it on the domestic market today, it's not worth me selling. We have to think that if in 5 or 10 years' time that we've removed 20% off the domestic market, what have we actually done with our domestic market prices? We also need to consider using levy funds for export marketing activities. Currently we can't use levy funds for marketing activities at all, and I think this is something that needs some looking into in regards to whether or not we can promote an Australian brand of vegetables through the use of that levy. And we also need to invest in Brand Australia. It has to be a value proposition. It has to be about our service. It has to be about our product. Brand is not just your logo. There's so much more that goes into that. We're certainly not the only clean green producers in the world, and everybody else is becoming cleaner and greener. So what is going to be our value proposition into the future? So what have we changed on our farm? We're looking at diversifying. We've started to move into niche products and trying to develop some niche products. We're looking at value adding. So we've bought a florating machine and looking at adding value in that way, and again, utilising of that waste. And we've got some pigs, which are the bane of my father's existence, but the battle on that one hasn't ended yet, but waste utilisation once again. I'd like to thank my mum and my dad and my sister for their support, and particularly my dad and the team on the farm, because every time I came home from another Nuffield trip, I had another million ideas that I wanted implemented yesterday. Whether or not they were going to work, I still pushed forward, and that's very much the Nuffield experience and very much what happens at Nuffield, and we'll continue to work through some of those new ideas that I have, and we should have some cauliflowers being exported to Singapore in the next couple of weeks, so hopefully that'll be my Nuffield success story, but if that's not it, there's so much other learning and capacity that's been built, and I'm eternally grateful. Thank you.